Hi everyone, my name is Abhiraj Garikapati. Welcome to my YouTube channel Amazing Abhi.
Choose your next adventure.
Demanding to know what he thought he was doing, that single voice froze everything. The pressure on the battleground shifted instantly as the Emperor released his aura, a suffocating presence that made even Triss react. The old man's expression changed immediately, sweat forming as he realized his mistake. He lowered his sword without hesitation, sheathing it, before bowing deeply toward the Emperor, trying to justify his actions by claiming that Logan had harmed one of the Empire's talents and deserved a miserable death to uphold its authority. The Emperor's response was cold and cutting. He mocked the reasoning, questioning whether Triss was implying that the Emperor's own decision was disgraceful. The word struck harder than any blade, and Triss began sweating heavily before dropping to the ground, slamming his head against it in apology, repeatedly declaring that he had never intended such disrespect and had only acted in the Empire's interest. The Emperor's gaze sharpened as he spoke again, making it clear that he himself was the Empire and any action taken against his will could not be justified as loyalty. Triss continued to bow and strike his head against the ground, blood beginning to form from the repeated impact as he'd admitted his failure and acknowledged that he had crossed the line. Nearby, Luther, now barely back on his feet, watched the scene in stunned silence, unable to believe what he was witnessing, while Logan observed everything with equal disbelief, realizing that the so-called First Sword of the continent was bowing this deeply without resistance. After a moment, the Emperor finally spoke again, stating that since Triss had recognized his mistake before it was too late, he would take his long service into account. Logan, watching closely, initially thought that such a figure would not receive any severe punishment, but the Emperor's next words proved otherwise. He declared that Triss would be stripped of his authority over the Imperial Knights and would forfeit his title. Even then, Triss only responded with gratitude, thanking the Emperor for his mercy. Logan stared at him in shock, unable to fully process how a superhuman of that level could submit so completely, questioning whether authority alone could truly force someone that powerful to yield like this. The Emperor then turned his attention back to the situation at hand, calmly stating that Jerem's injuries, though unfortunate, were a natural outcome of a duel between martial artists, and that no blame would be assigned. Instead, he expressed genuine interest in Logan's performance, acknowledging how it defied common sense, and declared Logan the victor of the duel, promising that he would be rewarded accordingly. The surrounding crowd immediately accepted the decision without objection, not out of agreement, but because none of them dared to oppose the Emperor's will. Then the Emperor's gaze locked onto Logan once more. With a faint smile, he addressed him as the young hero of Grandia, and extended his hand forward, offering something far more dangerous than any attack. He asked Logan to pledge his loyalty, promising authority, wealth, and glory beyond imagination, leaving Logan standing there, stunned by the weight of the offer and the implications behind it. A faint smile appeared on his lips as the weight of the offer settled into his mind. The thought came naturally, almost temptingly, that if he simply nodded his head right now, everything would change. He wouldn't have to stand against a monstrous force like the Empire. He wouldn't have to gamble his life in an impossible war, and most importantly, he could secure what mattered to him the most, the safety of his family. The logic was clean, simple, and undeniably appealing, and for a second, it almost felt like the obvious choice. But then something inside him resisted. A memory surfaced, sharp and uninvited. In that memory, Logan stood on the edge of a cliff behind Captain Liyue, the man he had once looked up to in his past life, the one whose presence carried a quiet weight that words alone could not match. The wind had howled around them back then, but what remained etched in Logan's mind were the words that had been spoken, words about what it truly meant to live as a person. Logan's thoughts sharpened as he reflected on himself back then, admitting inwardly that he hadn't fought for ideals like the others, that he hadn't been driven by loyalty to the kingdom or some grand purpose. The truth was far simpler and far uglier. He had fought out of rage, a raw and burning fury that refused to fade no matter how much time passed, and even now, standing in this moment, that same rage still existed, unextinguished. Slowly, Logan rose to his feet, and without hesitation, he spoke, stating that he could not serve a foreign sovereign. The words were firm, leaving no room for doubt, carrying the weight of everything he had lived through. In his mind, he reaffirmed it clearly, that even if he were to die and be reborn again, that rage, that refusal would never disappear. The reaction was immediate. The people around him froze in shock, unable to believe that someone had just rejected such an overwhelming offer. Luther stood there stunned, struggling to process how Logan could turn down something that could have changed everything. Even the emperor himself paused, momentarily surprised, his expression shifting as he studied Logan more closely. Their eyes met, and what the emperor saw there was not hesitation, not fear, but unwavering resolve. A slow smirk formed on his face, and in the next moment, he burst into loud laughter, clearly amused, remarking that it had been a long time since someone had refused him. Rising from his seat, he admitted that the refusal only made him want Logan even more. Turning slightly, he dismissed the tension of the moment, stating that Logan had already shown him something remarkable, and that was enough for now. He then gave Logan time, telling him to remain in the palace a little longer, to experience the Empire firsthand, confident that once Logan truly understood what he stood to gain, his decision might change. And with that, the Emperor turned and left for his chambers, leaving behind a hall filled with shaken silence and a decision that had just shifted the course of everything. Sometime later, a bishop approached Logan and introduced herself as Plantace, a servant of Lord Acheron, the god of gold and commerce, saying it was an honor to meet him. Logan calmly replied that his injuries were not very severe, and apologized for troubling her, but the bishop gently dismissed his concern, explaining that His Imperial Majesty had already compensated her more than enough, so there was no need for him to feel burdened. As she leaned in to examine his wounds, Logan couldn't help but think how absurd the situation was, realizing that the emperor had summoned not just a higher-ranking disciple, but an actual bishop of the 9 great gods just to treat his injuries. Still, he stayed composed and asked about Jerome Decay. The bishop paused briefly before explaining that Jerome's wounds were healing unusually poorly, and that unfortunately, they had been unable to treat his right eye. Logan reacted with visible shock, but internally, he felt a quiet sense of relief. The bishop then urged him to focus on his own treatment first, warning that wounds inflicted by aura could have delayed effects. She raised her hand over his injured ribs and began chanting a divine spell. In the next instant, a soft glow enveloped the wound and Logan felt the difference immediately. Looking at the light surrounding him, he realized this was divine power, slightly different from what he had witnessed during Stella's naming ceremony. Within moments, the pain vanished completely and even his internal injuries were healed. Logan was genuinely surprised, acknowledging inwardly that the effect was undeniable. The bishop, observing him, remarked that it was her first time seeing aura dispelled so cleanly, suggesting that his body must be exceptionally resilient. Logan thanked her politely, though in his mind, he knew the truth that he had already forced out the remaining aura using his force core. As he began putting his shirt back on, the bishop suddenly asked if he was from Grandia. Logan confirmed it and questioned why she asked. The bishop rested her chin on her hand, hesitating slightly before mentioning that she had heard a rather strange story from Grandia Parish. Logan's interest sharpened as he asked what kind of story it was, though internally, he'd admitted he wasn't very familiar with religious matters. The bishop, now visibly uneasy, explained that she had heard rumors of children being born upon whom divine power had no effect whatsoever. She then asked if Logan knew anything about it. At that moment, a memory surfaced in Logan's mind. He recalled Stella's birth ceremony, the moment when the bishop had tried to bless the child and failed, leaving that. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Apai grow naturally. Old bishop in shock. The realization hit him instantly. The story she was referring to could only be about Stella, the daughter of Felix Esperanza. The bishop's words immediately brought back an old memory for Logan. During Stella's naming ceremony, Bishop Crimson had personally blessed her. However, something strange had happened that day. Instead of accepting the blessing, Stella had actually repelled the bishop's divine power. The memory became even clearer as Logan recalled a conversation with his master. Back then, his master had informed him that the church had sent an invitation to indoctrinate Stella. At the time, Logan hadn't thought much of it, but now the pieces were beginning to connect. As far as he knew, only Bishop Crimson and himself, thanks to his ability to perceive divine power, should have been capable of noticing such an anomaly. Returning his attention to the present, Logan directly asked the bishop whether this was a serious problem. The bishop shook her head and explained that it wasn't necessarily serious, nor was it completely unprecedented. However, she added that cases like this had only occurred once or twice across the entire continent during the past century. The strange part was that similar reports now seemed to be appearing one after another throughout Grandia. As she spoke, the bishop carefully studied Logan's expression before commenting that it appeared he genuinely knew nothing about it. Logan calmly played along and apologized for being unable to help. The bishop quickly reassured him that there was no need to apologize and suggested that it could simply be a false rumor. Logan politely nodded, but inwardly he wasn't convinced for a second. If it were truly just a baseless rumor, there would have been no reason for a bishop to bring it up and question him directly. Thinking back to Stella, a sense of unease settled in his mind. Whatever was happening, it clearly wasn't normal. As the conversation came to an end, Logan quietly decided that once he returned to Grandia, he would have to investigate the matter himself. 1 week had passed since Logan's meeting with the Emperor. To avoid attracting the Emperor's attention, he deliberately refrained from leaving the palace grounds and instead spent his time training, while also teaching Victor. Surprisingly, the Emperor didn't come looking for him during that entire period. However, the peace didn't last. While Logan was in the middle of teaching Victor some techniques, one of his attendants suddenly interrupted and announced that Sir Logan had a guest. Before Logan could even react, a man entered carrying a gift and introduced himself as the eldest son of Baron Hubert, politely asking whether Sir Logan was available. Unfortunately, that was only the beginning. Soon, another noble arrived, introducing himself as Viscount Cuffs from the Assyrian tax office. Then another appeared. Viscount Pomegane from the treasury tried to introduce himself, only to get shoved aside by another noble who loudly insisted that he had arrived first. Outside Logan's room, nobles were practically arguing over who deserved the right to speak with him first. The hallway became so noisy that it sounded more like a marketplace than part of the imperial palace. Hearing the growing commotion outside, Victor nervously asked what they were supposed to do, while Logan could only stare in confusion and wonder what kind of madness had suddenly descended upon his room. Sometime later, Luther arrived and was immediately greeted by the sight of gifts piled throughout the room. Looking around in disbelief, he asked whether all of it had come from those visitors. Logan confirmed it, explaining that every single guest had brought something valuable. There were low-grade artifacts, rare items, and even several elixirs among the gifts. Luther's eyes nearly popped out when he spotted one of the elixirs and questioned whether it was actually genuine. Logan remained calm on the surface, but internally he found the situation unsettling. No matter how wealthy the Empire was, handing out gifts of this caliber shouldn't be normal. The more he thought about it, the more it felt like a carefully planned move. Then he remembered the Emperor's words from their first meeting, telling him to experience the Empire firsthand and see what he stood to gain. Realizing that this might be part of that very plan, Logan's expression darkened. For a moment, he considered simply leaving the Empire altogether, since he had been invited personally. Surely the Emperor couldn't openly act against Grandia. But even as the thought appeared, Logan dismissed it as overly optimistic. Luther and Victor watched him silently, completely unable to follow whatever complicated thoughts were running through his head. After thinking things through, Logan concluded that his official appearance in Assyrian was scheduled for the day of the spring festival, so he would simply endure everything until then and leave afterward. Even if the situation was incredibly frustrating, there wasn't much else he could do. Just then, another knock echoed from the door, assuming it was yet another visitor. Luther immediately demanded to know who it was. Logan walked over himself, already expecting another noble carrying gifts. As he opened the door, he started to ask what was going on and whether another guest had arrived. But the palace steward cut him off before he could finish. The steward announced that Sir Logan had received an invitation and handed over a sealed letter. Curious, Logan took it and looked at the seal. The moment he recognized it, his eyes widened slightly. It bore the imperial seal itself. The steward then formally informed him that the invitation had come directly from His Imperial Majesty, the Emperor. As evening arrived, the scene shifted to the Emperor's grand banquet. The massive hall was overflowing with nobles' laughter and music. Servants moved between tables, carrying expensive food and wine, while musicians played in the background, creating an atmosphere that screamed wealth and power. A noble woman approached Logan and openly looked him over from head to toe. After studying his red hair and red eyes, she remarked that he must be the man everyone had been talking about. Curious, she asked for his name again. Logan politely introduced himself as Logan McLean. The woman smiled warmly and commented that he looked even more manly than the rumor suggested. She then wondered aloud whether all men from Grandia were like him. That question nearly caught Logan off guard, and with obvious embarrassment, he could only admit that he wasn't really sure. At the same time, whispers continued spreading throughout the hall. Logan could clearly hear nearby nobles gossiping about him. Some questioned whether this bumpkin from a small kingdom was truly the same Logan McLean everyone had been discussing. Others scoffed at the idea of His Majesty showing so much interest in a rookie from a minor nation. Listening to all of it, Logan could only sigh. Internally, the entire situation felt strange, and the more attention he received, the more suspicious he became. Just then, the atmosphere in the hall suddenly changed. Guards snapped to attention and loudly announced the arrival of His Imperial Majesty. The conversations died instantly as the Emperor entered the banquet hall wearing a confident smile. One after another, everyone dropped to their knees in greeting. Logan hesitated for a brief moment. Every instinct in his body resisted bowing, but under the circumstances, he ultimately lowered himself onto one knee as well. The Emperor casually walked through the crowd, but instead of continuing toward the center of the hall, he stopped directly in front of Logan. The unexpected action stunned everyone nearby. Looking down at him, the Emperor casually asked whether he was enjoying the banquet, addressing him as Grandy as young star Logan McLean. Logan was completely baffled. He couldn't understand what game the Emperor was playing this time. Before he knew it, he found himself seated directly beside the Emperor himself. The Emperor personally poured wine into their cups and mentioned hearing that Logan had practically locked himself inside his quarters ever since arriving at the palace. According to him, that was exactly why he had summoned Logan tonight. He calmly explained that a person needed to experience the vastness of the world in order to broaden their perspective, and asked whether Logan agreed. Meanwhile, the surrounding nobles could barely hide their shock. They whispered among themselves in disbelief as they watched foreign nobles sit beside the Emperor and receive treatment for the Empire's highest figures. Feeling increasingly uncomfortable, Logan thanked the Emperor for his overwhelming consideration, but carefully pointed out that a bird trapped inside a cage could experience very little of the world. Eventually, it would simply suffocate. The Emperor showed no reaction to the remark. Instead, he continued pouring wine, while commenting that all of the Empire's attention must feel overwhelming from Logan's perspective. However, he suggested that Logan widen his gaze and consider another possibility. What if it wasn't the Empire restraining him? What if the kingdom itself was the real cage holding him back? The question left Logan completely speechless. Then, as if changing the subject entirely, the Emperor glanced down at his wine glass and remarked that it was far too small. He immediately ordered a subordinate to bring something larger. A short time later, servants returned carrying large soup bowls instead of cups. Without hesitation, before we move ahead, please take a second to share on this video. Sharing helps this video reach friends who may also enjoy anime, gaming, travel, cricket, chess, career basics, or personal stories. Your support helps Amazing Pie grow naturally. They began filling the massive bowls with expensive wine. Watching the scene unfold, Logan could only stare in disbelief and wonder if the Emperor genuinely intended to drink rare wine from bowls big enough to serve soup. Still seated beside the Emperor, Logan finally decided to ask the question that had been bothering him. He asked why His Majesty was going to such lengths for someone like him. Surely the Empire, a nation overflowing with powerful warriors and talented individuals, had no shortage of people far greater than him. The Emperor calmly acknowledged that such people certainly existed for now. However, he pointed out that even Triss Hansby, the current First Sword of the continent, had never displayed such extraordinary ability at Logan's age. in a legendary figure one day. Because of that, he openly declared that Logan's value to him alone exceeded the value of the entire kingdom of Grandia. The statement nearly made Logan forget he was at a banquet. Internally, he couldn't comprehend how a single person could be considered more valuable than an entire nation. Around them, the surrounding nobles were equally shaken. Murmurs immediately spread through the hall as people whispered in disbelief. No matter how small Grandia might be compared to the Empire, comparing a single young knight to an entire kingdom sounded completely insane. The Emperor continued speaking as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He'd advise Logan to think carefully about his future. Was allowing talent of this level to remain in a small kingdom truly the right choice? Was Grandia really the place where someone like him belonged? Listening to the Emperor's words, Logan found himself unable to decide whether the man genuinely believed every word he was saying, or had simply lost his mind. The frightening part was that the Emperor looked completely sincere. The Emperor glanced at the enormous bowl sitting before them and noted that it was finally full. He explained that the wine wasn't ordinary alcohol. It purified a knight's force and acted almost like medicine for warriors. Even within the Imperial Palace, only around 100 bottles were produced each year. It was one of the Empire's most treasured luxuries, completely unconcerned with its rarity. The Emperor generously told Logan to drink as much as he wanted. The nearby nobles nearly looked ready to cry. They stared at the wine with naked jealousy. While watching the Emperor hand it out like water, Logan thanked him politely before lifting the bowl and drinking every last drop without hesitation. As the wine flowed through his body, he could immediately tell that it truly was extraordinary. Yet the weight of the gesture felt even heavier than the wine itself. While everyone else saw generosity, Logan saw something else entirely. The Emperor wasn't simply being kind, he was obsessed. Every action, every word, and every reward pointed toward the same goal. The man wanted Logan, and he wanted him badly. That realization only strengthened Logan's resolve. There was no chance that a ruler this obsessed with talent would ever abandon his ambitions of conquest. Logan understood the consequences immediately. If he accepted the Emperor's offer and became part of the Empire, he wouldn't be allowed to stand safely in the background. To prove his loyalty, he would inevitably be forced to lead the charge against Grandia itself. After draining every last drop of the precious wine, Logan set the bowl down and looked directly at the Emperor. There wasn't even the slightest hesitation in his eyes anymore. The Emperor had offered him power, wealth, status, and a future beyond anything Grandia could provide. But Logan had already made his decision calmly, yet firmly. He declared that his kingdom, his family meant everything to him. And because of that, he respectfully asked His Majesty to withdraw the offer. For the first time that evening, the Emperor looked genuinely surprised. The lively atmosphere of the banquet instantly died. Moments ago, the hall had been filled with music, laughter, and conversation, but now a suffocating silence spread through the room. Every noble present stared at Logan in disbelief. Some looked shocked, others horrified. Countless people would have thrown themselves at the Emperor's feet for such an opportunity. Yet this young man from Grandia had just rejected it without hesitation. One of the nobles stepped forward and respectfully asked for permission to speak regarding a certain matter. The Emperor slowly shifted his gaze toward him and asked what it was, addressing him as Duke Travis. The Duke explained that he had recently heard a rather interesting story involving Grandia, and believed His Majesty would find it worth hearing. The moment Logan heard that, a bad feeling immediately crept into his mind. His eyes locked onto Duke Travis, and he couldn't help wondering what that old geezer was planning to say. Meanwhile, the Emperor's interest was clearly piqued. Since the topic involved Grandia, he ordered the Duke to continue. Looking directly at Logan, Duke Travis revealed that the story originated from the time Sir Logan MacLean had suppressed the civil war in Grandia. The moment those words left his mouth, Logan's heart sank. Of all the things the Duke could have brought up, it had to be the Civil War. Duke Travis calmly continued, explaining that during that conflict, Logan had created a special weapon unlike anything that had ever existed before. The effect of those words was immediate. The Emperor's relaxed demeanor vanished completely, and his expression turned deadly serious, demanding further clarification and asking exactly what kind of weapon Duke Travis was talking about. Logan's heart nearly stopped the moment Duke Travis brought up the weapon. Internally, he cursed his rotten luck. Of all places, of all times, why did the old fool have to mention it here? If the Emperor learned about the repeating crossbow or the Liberacello in this room, everything could unravel instantly. And even worse possibility crossed his mind. What if the Empire was already developing its own version? No matter which scenario was true, one thing was certain. Getting back to Grandia safely would become far more difficult. Fortunately, the Emperor's reaction wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of showing interest, his expression darkened with annoyance. He clicked his tongue and muttered that Duke Travis had completely ruined his wine. Logan watched in surprise as the Emperor turned his gaze toward the Duke, his mood visibly souring. With a cold voice, he demanded to know how Travis dared to bring up matters of trade, while a guest was seated directly beside him. The accusation alone was enough to drain all color from the Duke's face. Cold sweat poured down his forehead as he immediately began stammering excuses, claiming it had merely been a careless slip of the tongue, brought on by his devotion to the Empire. The Emperor listened for a moment, before calmly replying that he understood the Duke's patriotism. For that reason alone, he would overlook the offense this once. Then, with a dismissive flick of his hand, he ordered Travis to leave and instructed him not to show his face for the rest of the day. The Duke expressed his gratitude before practically sprinting out of the banquet hall. The sight was so pathetic that several nobles quietly looked away in embarrassment. Once the nuisance was gone, the Emperor immediately returned his attention to Logan, as though nothing had happened. He dismissed the entire incident as a meaningless discussion, not worth dwelling on, and encouraged Logan to simply enjoy himself. There was no need to concern himself with trivial matters. Instead, he should take this opportunity to properly experience the Empire and later share his honest thoughts about it. Then a faint smile appeared on the Emperor's face, though there was something unsettling hidden behind it. In a calm voice, he reminded Logan to keep his previous offer in mind, because it still stood. The invitation had not been withdrawn. Logan remained silent throughout the entire exchange. Outwardly, he showed no reaction, but inwardly, every alarm bell in his head was ringing. The Emperor's obsession with recruiting him hadn't faded in the slightest. If anything, it seemed to be growing stronger. A few days later, back at his mansion, Logan trained relentlessly. His sword carved through the air and rapid arcs, while violent bursts of force exploded from every swing. Ever since meeting the Emperor, he had thrown himself into training whenever possible, partly to strengthen himself, and partly to distract his mind from everything that had happened inside the palace. In the end, the Emperor had completely ignored his request to withdraw the offer. Still, Logan couldn't deny that the man's confidence had eased one particular concern. Someone who ruled with such overwhelming certainty probably wouldn't immediately hunt him down the moment he left after the spring festival. That thought brought him some comfort, but it wasn't enough to calm the growing problem inside his own body. His force core was becoming unstable. Every encounter with the Empire's superhumans had pushed it further, and now it trembled more violently than ever before. The sensation was impossible to ignore. Logan could feel the threshold approaching with every passing day, and for the first time in his life, he found himself desperately suppressing a breakthrough rather than chasing one. The temptation was enormous. All it would take was a single moment of carelessness, and he could awaken into a superhuman right here and now. Yet that was precisely what he couldn't allow. The Emperor's eyes were still on him. If he awakened inside the Imperial Palace, there was no guarantee he would ever be allowed to leave. The mere thought made Logan grimace. His imagination immediately painted a future he wanted no part of. He could practically see himself begging before the Emperor, while the ruler smiled in satisfaction, congratulating him on finally becoming a superhuman, and declaring that the Empire clearly suited him better than the Grandia. The vision only grew worse from there. He imagined himself trapped inside the Empire indefinitely, while Luther and Victor returned home without him. No matter how absurd the scenario sounded, it sent a chill down his spine. Logan shook his head and tightened his grip on his sword. No, he couldn't afford to lose control now. If anything, this delay might become an advantage. Luther's words from long ago resurfaced in his mind. Awakening wasn't something that could simply be copied after witnessing it. If it were that easy, every talented knight would become a superhuman since he was being forced to wait anyway. Perhaps he could use the time to prepare for an even greater transformation later. That realization steadied his breathing. He wasn't falling behind. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Apply grow naturally. And he was preparing. Just as Logan began settling back into his training, the doors to the training ground suddenly burst open. Victor hurried inside, looking far more nervous than usual. One glance at his expression was enough to make Logan stop. Victor wasn't merely concerned. He looked genuinely anxious. When Logan asked what happened, Victor immediately informed him that a guest had arrived. Logan sighed in annoyance. He had already instructed everyone to ignore visitors. However, when he told Victor to send the guest away, Victor flatly refused. The response caught Logan off guard. Victor rarely disobeyed him so directly, seeing the tension on his companion's face. Logan's expression gradually hardened. Whoever had arrived wasn't an ordinary visitor. A faint sense of unease settled over him as he put away his sword and headed toward the reception room himself. The moment Logan opened the door, he froze. Sitting calmly inside was none other than Triss Hansby. For a brief instant, the room became completely silent. The image of the old man trying to kill him after Jerome lost his eye flashed through Logan's mind. Every instinct in his body immediately went on alert. Triss slowly rose from his seat while Logan remained standing near the entrance and bluntly asked whether he had come seeking revenge. Triss looked genuinely amused by the question, repeating the word revenge as though it were ridiculous. The atmosphere grew heavy enough that even the soldiers accompanying Logan sensed it. Several immediately shifted into combat stances, their hands dropping to the hilt of their swords. Logan himself wasn't much different. His hand drifted closer to his sword as he stared directly at the strongest warrior in the Empire. A faint smirk appeared on Old Man's face. Before he calmly asked whether Logan truly believed he would hold such a petty grudge after His Majesty had already rendered judgment. The words instantly shattered the tension. Logan felt a massive weight lift off his shoulders. Around him, several soldiers visibly relaxed as well. The possibility of fighting Triss Hansby inside the Imperial capital had been one of the worst outcomes imaginable. Logan asked Triss what the purpose of this visit was. Triss remained calm as ever and explained that His Imperial Majesty had been paying close attention to him. Ever since the banquet, Logan hadn't stepped outside the estate, even once. According to the Emperor, a young man with Logan's talent shouldn't lock himself away from the world. As a result, Triss had been given direct orders to personally show him what the wider world looked like. The explanation sounded strange enough already, but before Logan could ask what exactly that meant, the atmosphere around Triss suddenly changed. A terrifying pressure erupted from the old man, and in the next instant, a torrent of blazing fire exploded into existence above him. The flames roared like a living beast as they surged across the room, instantly surrounding Logan from every direction. The reception hall disappeared beneath a sea of fire. The walls, ceiling, and floor seemed swallowed by an inferno, so vast that Logan's heart skipped a beat. For the first time since Triss arrived, genuine shock crossed his face. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The flames looked completely real. They moved like real fire, radiated heat like real fire, and consumed the entire room as if reality itself had been set ablaze. Yet Triss stood calmly within the flames and explained that this wasn't ordinary fire. It was the materialization of spirit. Hearing that only made Logan even more stunned. Mere spirit taking physical form to such a degree should have been impossible. However, Triss gave him no time to process it. Instead, the old swordsman coldly warned him to focus. If his concentration slipped even slightly, his soul could be destroyed. That warning proved no exaggeration. The flames pressed inward from every direction, and Logan immediately felt as though he had been thrown into the heart of a volcano. The heat was unbearable. Every instinct in his body screamed in agony as he struggled to remain conscious. He could practically feel himself being consumed alive. Yet right when the pressure reached its peak, his force core suddenly reacted. A brilliant golden light erupted from within him, expanding outward and forming a protective barrier around his body. The raging spiritual flames crashed against the golden force, but failed to penetrate it. Logan clenched his teeth and poured every ounce of strength he possessed into maintaining the defense, while Triss observed the reaction with no interest. Then, without hesitation, the old man directed the full force of the inferno directly against the barrier. Massive waves of spiritual fire slammed into the golden shield one after another. Each impact shook Logan to his core, forcing him to wonder if his force core was finally beginning to fail. But as the struggle continued, something strange caught his attention. Despite the overwhelming heat, his clothes remained untouched. Not a single thread had burned. The realization hit him instantly. This wasn't physical fire. His body wasn't being harmed at all. The only thing under attack was his soul. The moment he understood that fact, his panic vanished. Logan raised his head and stared directly at Triss. If this attack targeted the soul rather than the body, then there was only one technique he possessed that might be capable of opposing it. Deep within his memories rested a secret sword technique, unlike anything else in the world. It was a technique capable of cutting through abilities themselves. A technique that could sever aura and create wounds. Even divine magic struggled to heal. Rising to his feet, Logan unleashed the divine sword fourth form, scorching slash. Instantly, an overwhelming wave of power erupted around him. Golden force exploded outward in every direction, tearing through the sea of flames like a hurricane ripping apart a storm. The inferno that had engulfed the room was blown away completely. For the first time since arriving, genuine shock appeared on the old geyser's face. He stared at Logan as though he had just witnessed something impossible. He couldn't understand what had happened. He couldn't understand how a young knight, who wasn't even a superhuman, had shattered a spiritual technique that should have overwhelmed him. Logan simply looked back with a small knowing smile, offering no explanation whatsoever. The brief silence that followed lasted only a moment. Triss suddenly raised a finger and pointed directly at Logan. Instantly, Logan's instinct screamed danger. Every nerve in his body tensed as he prepared himself for another attack. But what happened next was beyond anything he expected. Triss calmly sliced his finger downward through empty air. There was no visible attack, no explosion, no wave of force. Yet the moment the gesture was completed, Logan felt a horrifying sensation consume him. It was as if an invisible blade had passed directly through his body. For a split second, he truly believed he had been cut in half. Agonizing pain exploded through every inch of his being. His body felt as though it had shattered into countless fragments. His arms, legs, torso, and even his consciousness seemed to break apart and scatter. Logan couldn't even understand what was happening. It felt as though he was being butchered piece by an attack he couldn't see or comprehend. Panic threatened to overwhelm him. Was this how he died? Was he about to be torn apart without even understanding what had killed him? Yet even as the sensation of destruction spread through him, Logan refused to surrender. He gritted his teeth and forced every ounce of power he possessed to erupt outward. Slowly, impossibly, the shattered pieces began to return. The fragments of himself that felt scattered across existence gradually reassembled. Piece by piece, he forced himself back together through sheer willpower alone, until the horrifying sensation finally subsided. When the nightmare ended, Logan found himself collapsing to one knee. Sweat poured from his body while his breathing became ragged and uneven. Immediately, Victor and the others rushed toward him in alarm, asking if he was all right. Their reactions confused him at first. Looking around, Logan quickly realized that none of them had seen what had happened. To everyone else, only a few moments had passed. Triss stood calmly nearby, and finally explained the technique. It was called the Soul Blade, a specialized sword strike capable of directly cutting the soul itself. According to him, only aura users who had approached the absolute pinnacle of power could begin learning such a technique. Having delivered his demonstration, Triss turned and began walking away. Before leaving, he casually remarked that if Logan truly wished to learn powers like these, he only needed to remain within the Empire. Still, kneeling on the floor and burning with frustrations. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to Amazing Appy. Subscribing makes sure you do not miss the next video, and it gives me motivation to keep improving the quality of every upload. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next one.